Hello and welcome to my first podcast. My name is Brooks Kelly and I'm with the Mortgage Link. I've created this podcast for people to understand personal finance and wellness from an industry expert point of view. So I'm going to be interviewing many of our industry experts, both in real estate and finance, along with anything else that my community wants to see. So I'm really excited today to bring my first guest in. It's someone I've known for almost 2 decades now, a leader in the industry, in the real estate market. I want to welcome today Doug Smith from DHS Realty. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Brooks. Thank you. It's an incredible setup, and it's an honor to be your first guest. I know that my profession wouldn't be the way it is and my agent success without your help. Being able to be reachable 5 a.m. to midnight, it seems like you have the same hours that I have, and I've called you in the evening at 9 or 10 p.m. on Saturdays, and just love your professionalism and your knowledge, and I think it's great for the public to be educated and informed on the changes that are happening right now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I am available those hours. Some days I just can't put my phone away, and I just can't help it. So, but that's the way our industry works. That's how
Absolutely.
you become so successful. That's the way I have. My first mentor in the business told me, if you answer your phone, then you're going to be successful in this business. And that's crazy. Even, 17 years later, it still rings true because so many people are they have boundaries that they, have fictitiously put out there and think that, well, it's 5 o'clock, I shouldn't be working anymore. And that's not the real estate business.
No, not at all. I can remember, when I took my first real estate class in 1989. Back then there were no cell phones, and so you had a landline. But once cell phones got in, there was a big movement to have a voice recording that would say, if you reach me after 6 p.m., I'll return all calls tomorrow between 10 and noon. And I remember the first time I heard that as a kind of an evolution of what they wanted realtors to do in the early 90s when cell phones came out. I knew I wasn't going to follow that path because it's not what you sign up for. Just like when you sign up to be a Marine or a Navy SEAL, you're not signing up for peacetime. You're signing up for when it hits the fan, you have to be there. And in real estate, it's a 24-hour job. Yeah. And, there's no ceiling, and that's what's beautiful about it. That's what one of my first real estate instructors told me in 1989. And I love that because it is how much you put into it is how much you'll get out. I wish they would have told me there's no floor, because that's the one thing that I tell all my agents these days is that there's no ceiling, but there's no floor. So you got to be like that squirrel that you see in the winter with a bunch of nuts on the side of their mouth. You got to realize that when you make a commission, that it's not going to be every month, and you put it away, and you have to become your own investment advisor, your own insurance agent. But there's a lot of upside to it, the freedom to be able to make your own hours, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of prosperity out of it, and I know you have too. So, I remember, I don't know if you remember, but I remember the first time we met. I was invited to play in a golf tournament, charity golf tournament out in McKinney at, what was that? What's the name of that neighborhood?
Stonebridge.
Heritage Ranch.
Heritage Ranch, that's
Heritage Ranch, yeah. And Jerry Welch invited me. He was an agent that worked at Remax when you were at Remax back then. And it was me and you and Mal and him. And I hit a shot on a par 3, and I don't know, probably 3 or 4 feet from the hole. And you looked at me and you go, man, if you can do mortgages the way you can play golf, then you're my guy. And that was 15 years ago, I think it was. And you were true to your word. I mean, from that moment on, like, you called me and me only. And I really appreciate that loyalty that we've had over the years. So.
No, for sure. I do remember that. And I remember when I went up, the ball went to the right and hit somebody almost parallel with me. Yeah, and you think I'm 55. So, I mean, that had to have been when I was 35 years old, 30, it's been a long time. And what I really respect about you and what I try to emulate myself, and I even told this morning in a video to my agents that I think everybody in life has to have a North Star. And obviously my wife and God and, who I believe in. But when it comes to who my North Star is, when I need somebody to talk to a lender that's not going to feed them any BS, it's you. And
appreciate that.
I mean, you've done my own loans. I've told people that I don't use people that I don't respect, that aren't full of integrity. So it's a hard call to make when you have to call somebody and say that they can't get a loan. I used to be in oil and gas, and a dry hole call was awful because it meant that I had to call and make the worst comment to an investor that their $25,000 investment would have no return. But when you make that call as quick as you make a successful call, I think that really shows your character. And so I've always appreciated that about you, that you're honest about whether somebody can get a loan or not. So
well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, honesty is the best policy when it comes across. Transparency and in our business it's just, there's not enough of it. And I believe that, you have to face the problems head on in order for, you guys to have the right information and for the clients not to be disappointed. So,
absolutely.
Let's take a step back though. Like you mentioned the great Shannon, everybody around knows Shannon. You talk about her all the time. So tell us about her and your relationship with Shannon and where y'all met.
Yeah, sure. So I was previously married 13 years, and I have 2 daughters. One's 25 and one's 22 years old. We kind of grew apart. I'm big into athletics, and I'd go work out. I'd play competitive tennis on a national level. And at some point, my wife and I, we grew distant. At the same time, I was playing mixed doubles in a lot of tournaments with Shannon. And she was married and I was married. I never had her phone number. When the match was over, I would just say, see you next week, or if we were going to line up together. And I got divorced, and I dated a girl for about 6 months that we were pretty serious, but her kids were a little younger than mine. And I kind of moved on past that stage of having toddlers, and my kids were 9 and 7 at the time. And we met really at a discotheque. I'm a disco dancer, which most people know.
I did not know that.
No, I'm joking.
A discotheque, huh?
But we were at I was with a fireman friend. I was a volunteer firefighter and a full-time firefighter for 10 years in Frisco. And I was out one night with a firefighter friend, and he made kind of a bet with me that we couldn't get into a nightclub based on what he was wearing. And we got in, and I bought drinks for him the whole night, and Shannon came in. We started dancing, and she was actually dating a guy that she had just broken up with about a week before, named Doug Smith. So it was kind of funny because it was almost kind of simultaneous that she broke up with him and we started dating. Her kids were 7 and 9. My kids were 7 and 9. We went on a date, and the first date that we took the kids on, which was after we had been together for 4 or 5 months, her son Mitch, who's now 22, on the way home, Shannon was with her kids and said, well, what do you think about Doug? And he said, well, if the old Doug Smith was here, the new Doug Smith is here. And I'll never forget it. So it's been great. We've seen them go through their trials and tribulations and their successes. And my wife, she's a speech therapist for autistic kids.
Oh, wow.
She has a heart of gold. And I don't know anybody that she's ever gone to bed with mad. She has a forgiving heart. She's full of grace. Incredible family. Her mom and her sister and Julia, our daughter, they go travel once a year. She's going to get her broker's license this year. She's studying for it right now. About to set up her test time. She's been approved by Trek, and she does all the books for DHS. So on the first of each month, we're reaching out to agents, and she's always the one that asks for the money in a nice way when agents don't pay. Yeah, it's been a blessing, and I just am thankful that God put me there at that bar that night. And I always find it funny when people tell me how they meet, because when I ask them how they meet, they're kind of reserved if they say they met on Match or at a bar. And I'm always the one to say where I met my wife. And I don't think it really matters where you meet. I think it matters that when I met her that night that we started to date, and I can analogize it to what's happening right now in real estate with these new forms that have changed, and that I didn't ask her to marry me the first night I met her. And what I did is I enjoyed that night, got her phone number, which is what I would do if I met a buyer. I would reach out to them and try to establish a rapport. And then I'd go out on a couple other dates with them, similar to showing them some homes, getting to know them, and then basically show them what's called a buyer rep agreement, which is almost like a marriage certificate. And when I got licensed in 1994, my first class was in 1989. In 94, every agent in the state of Texas represented the seller. So no agent in Texas ever before 1996 represented a buyer. Really? There was no buyer representation agreement. So it was kind of crazy because for 2 years I was working with friends from high school. And I mean, we got in trouble together and they thought I was their buddy. And, I had to tell them, like, even though we're going to Whataburger every day and getting burgers and looking at 40 homes over a course of 6 months, you were never my client. You were always a customer. And in 96, the legislature passed a law that gave us the buyer rep. We've had that since 96, and up until June 24th of this last month, we had some updates.
Yeah.
And so I just try to explain to agents, when you meet somebody, they don't want to work with you forever. They don't even know you yet. You just met them. And so you have to be able to step in somebody else's shoes and realize, like, hey, I got to show them I'm worthy of them being my client, from me being their advocate, to get paid on a transaction. And so that's one of the things I really pride myself in at our firm, is that I've got 18-year-olds and 80-year-olds and everybody in between with all kinds of life experiences. And I kind of, tell them there's 3 things you got to know when you show somebody a home, and you can know nothing else. And they're going to look at you and probably say, I've never heard that before. And, it's the backyard doesn't face west because we have a lot of sun in the summer. Got to water your foundation, and floor plans are important when the master's on the first floor versus a master on the second on a 2-story. So, but yeah, it's an ever evolving market, and I love it.
Well, I love how you equate life to real estate too, and back and forth. I think I've heard you say that analogy about, dating your buyer and then being married to it. And, you definitely married the right one when it comes to Shannon. So
absolutely.
She's a phenomenal woman, and lucky to know her, and definitely part of your brokerage and your whole family. And that's just a very family oriented brokerage that you've got. So love going to events with all of them, including her. So, I mean, when I met you, you were a big tennis player. You don't play tennis anymore though, do you?
No. So I played high school tennis. So I went 2 years at Sherman, was on the varsity team. And my dad, he had some restaurants in Sherman that were very similar to Whataburger. And Sherman, you used to have to go kind of east to get to Oklahoma. They built a loop around it, and now you go around the west side, and all the businesses went out. So we moved to Carrollton my sophomore year, and I got on the tennis team there, and I played probably 30 years of tennis. And during COVID, my wife and I, Shannon, we were at Walmart, which is right around the corner from where we live, and there was a net and a wiffle ball, and I didn't even know the name of the game, and we just put some chairs in our cul-de-sac. I mean, it's the height of COVID. Like, we were ordering food from Mexican Sugar, like picking it up every night. And we were just hitting this pickleball, which we didn't know was called a pickleball at the time. Just thought it was a wiffle ball. And we have totally immersed ourselves in that. And I've given all my tennis stuff up. And, but going back to tennis, and what I tell my agents all the time is that just Saturday, I met an agent at a Starbucks, and she was with another brokerage firm. And she said, can you guarantee me transactions? And I said, I can't guarantee you a transaction. I go, what broker has told you that? And she said that she was with a brokerage that guaranteed her transactions. I said, I'll tell you what will guarantee you transactions. Become an Uber driver, a waiter, a waitress, a bartender, get involved in Citizens Fire Academy, Citizens Police Academy, Rotary, which I got involved with when I was 21 in Farmers Branch, and I was the only one under 80 years old. But I did my time and got people out of it by showing up every week. But at the end of the day,
join the pickleball league, right?
Yeah. And so the highest price home I've ever sold in my life was $1.8 million, and it was a mixed doubles tennis partner. And she called me up, and obviously I could hold my own in tennis, and she knew my work ethic. And so, if I sucked at any sport, I wouldn't go play it recreationally. Because I think that one thing my agents need to understand, and any agent out there, is that you got to live your passion. People see your passion and ask you what you do in private life. And so I've immersed myself in pickleball. My wife and I play a tournament a week or a month. We usually place, and
there's always trophies.
Yeah,
I always see the trophies on the internet.
Yeah. And so I've gotten business from it. And I tell my agents, if you played soccer, baseball, softball in high school, that I don't care how old you are, get involved in some kind of rec league. After the game, you go have drinks or food, and people ask you, like, hey, what do you do? And I go, that's the leads that I can guarantee you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you got to build relationships,
it's
right?
All
it's all
relationship selling.
Forever and ever, like no matter what you do. I mean, there's a lot of other ways to do this business, but it's not it's not everlasting unless you build relationships around it.
For sure. I was actually, I've been listening to the convention. I'm a political junkie when it comes to both sides of the aisle. And over the weekend, I heard somebody say that any candidacy comes down to money, motivation, and momentum. And I thought of that. That's really the case in real estate. And one of the things that separates DHS from other brokerage firms is that we don't have any splits, any caps, and I don't do any BS. So the average price home, you should know, is $500,000, in this area, 400,000 nationwide. That's generally going to be anywhere from 12 to 15,000. So on the money side, agents net the most. And momentum, I kind of analogize to our training. We do a video a day. I'm available 5 a.m. to midnight with Lola, my manager. I know the contract in the back of my head, every single paragraph, almost every line. And then, motivation, momentum, money. And I try to motivate by people seeing what I'm doing every day, not being an ivory tower broker, which I've been with brokers like that. They're in an ivory tower, removed from their agents, don't know about changes coming up, don't train on it. And on July 29th of this month, the MLS has taken out what's called BAC in the MLS. And if you're making an offer without a certain addendum, you're not getting paid. And I can tell you there's about 50% of the brokers that haven't even talked to their agents about it. We train on it every single day. So I love it. And that's.
Yeah. I mean, there's I like the 3 M's that you came up with: money, motivation, and momentum.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a good one to remember. And it relates to any business, really. It's not real estate. It's not, I mean, motivation, I think, is oversold in so many ways. Like, motivation and discipline are completely different, but they're one and the same. Like, you got to motivate yourself to become disciplined, and you just have to be disciplined in order to work the process over and over. The mundane, the boring is what makes you money, right?
Absolutely.
Doing the same thing every day and getting better and better and better at it, getting better at scripting, better at presenting, better at contracts, better at pickleball, right?
Yeah.
And where I was going with the pickleball thing is, like, why do you think it became all the rage? Like, why does every middle-aged, human seem to be playing pickleball these days? Like,
yeah, it is funny. I think about it all the time. I mean, I had 3 tennis rackets and a bag, probably worth $1,500. I gave away to an agent in my office that does tennis lessons. And when he came over, he was like, "You're never going to play tennis again? Keep one racket." And I was like, "I will never play tennis again." It's ping pong for adults. And I grew up with ping pong my whole life. My wife and I played ping pong on vacations. We, just family time. We go upstairs, we play ping pong. It is a sport that, unlike tennis or golf, where I think you have to have an athletic ability to understand the game, that pickleball can be played by any kind of an athlete, any kind of condition, because there's different levels. And just hitting the ball back and forth for some is fun. And then you can get into the higher levels where it's much more competitive. And I played in a tournament the other day, and I think 5 guys I played against that I beat, all their comments afterwards, we were having a drink. It's like, the word intense and you go together like, coffee and cream.
Yeah. We're not here for fun. We're here to win.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I feel that intensity from you in every situation, which is great, and I think that's the attraction. But you've grown an incredible brokerage. It's been 3 years that you've had it, 3.5 or
yes.
3.5 years. So starting with you, Agent 1, 3.5 years ago to now, how many?
So basically on January 1st of 2021, I started DHS, and it was my wife and I, because she's always been licensed since 2012. And now we're at 350 agents.
Holy cow.
So I've got about 335, and then the difference of the 350 are ones that have their broker's license.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, the concept was it's kind of crazy, like how you think, I had somebody tell me once they never pass a meeting up. And that's just like their mantra in life. And they went to a meeting once and met Warren Buffett and just got basically his philosophy on how to invest, and I think of that back. I was married to Shannon for about 10 years because we just celebrated our 15th anniversary. So about 5 years ago, I did homebuyer seminars. And she was going to go with me to a homebuyer seminar I was doing for India Bazaar over by my
We've
house.
done those together.
Yeah, we've done those
it was
together.
Freezing cold that night. I remember that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. And she goes, well, how long is it? And I said, well, you'd be there 6 to 9. She's like, nobody want to listen to you from 6 to 9. And I said, well, if you go, then I'll buy you dinner afterwards. And so she went. There was 6 or 7 Indians that had come from India Bazaar, and it went 6 to 9, and they stayed and wanted to ask me questions almost to 11. And
Wow.
when we were driving home, she goes, you ought to be teaching somewhere with your passion. So at the time, I was with a different brokerage firm that recommended I go to Collin County to teach Association of Realtors. And Shannon was like, well, those are already realtors. Why don't you go to a school where there's students? So I interviewed at Champions, and really it's all Shannon. And they liked my interview, and it was pretty intense. And I was there 4 years and recruited a lot of agents for a different brokerage firm. So when I started my company, because a lot of those agents had joined because of me, they switched over fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I continue to teach there. Now I'm at Collin College as an adjunct professor. I teach all the real estate classes and sponsor, and just always think about real estate. I mean, I'll meet people that had no idea that real estate, to get into it, is about $1,000, can get your license in about a month, going to Champion School of Real Estate.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes, it's a people person profession.
Yeah. So what do you think is the recipe for that kind of success? I mean, 350 agents it's a lot of agents, and obviously you've recruited probably twice that in order to have that many because of the churn rate. But what's the recipe for success that you believe is working for you?
Well, I mean, I watch all these memes, and I'm like an addict on watching Instagram. And Snoop Dogg once was doing a video when he got his star, and he went up to give a speech, and he goes, I want to thank me. And he started talking about how he had made all the success. And I think that's true. Obviously, I wouldn't have been successful without Shannon. I think she's my biggest advocate. She backed me when I left the firm I was with. She was one of the ones that initiated the thought in my mind. But I can tell you that a lot of people will look and go, oh, 350 agents at $100 a month, and however many closings you have, you're doing really well. It just fell in your lap. I mean, what they didn't see is the day that my wife was asleep and I snuggled up next to her and told her that I was leaving my brokerage firm I was with, and that she and I were the only ones with the company, and I was starting it tomorrow. And it was like a brick wall. I didn't know what was on the other side. Nobody was there when my phone was on Do Not Disturb, and still is at midnight, when I'll have agents text me from 11 to 11:59, knowing that at midnight I won't answer, but 1 minute before I will.
Mm-hmm.
None of the people that talk about how our firm was successful saw me go on listings with agents, go on showings with agents. And I think the difference in what I told somebody the other day, I meet at Starbucks a lot of people that want to join our brokerage firm, is that most brokers should do what I do. They just don't. And I can go back to when I was a lifeguard and Newman Smith at Don Showman and Farmers Branch. There are 6 jobs that we had to do every night, and there were 6 lifeguards. And when we were on the podium watching over the swimmers, the other 5 were supposed to start doing their job, and a lot of them would be shooting the shit, not doing anything. So when I came down, I would do all their jobs because I knew it would help us get out quicker. And they would look at me and go, why are you doing more than you're supposed to do? And I was like, because it helps everybody. And it's that mindset that agents come into real estate or brokers and think they can do just the minimal to get business. Or they go to a closing when they're not a licensed agent and they see a $30,000 commission and think that agent didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And then they get their license and they completely fall flat because it's a lot of hustle. And I think that the number one thing that has made our firm successful, obviously I have an incredible manager, Lola Fashola, and she is me and a female personality. I couldn't do it without her. But at the end of the day, it's hustle. And to me, hustling is heaven. And I've always said that. And if you're not a hustler, it's hell. And I just think that a lot of people love the name broker and want to sit in this ivory tower and take 30 and 20% of an agent's commission, not be available, not fill out contracts, not offer to go with them. And, I went on a listing just Saturday with Lourdes Savalas. She's probably 75 years old. Met her over in Garland at a coffee shop. We got there early. I had a packet how I would list a home. She had a packet on how she would. We interspersed some documents. The seller walked in. It was a husband, a wife, and two of their kids. Well, I had bubble gum I gave to the two kids. The mom that was there was actually the daughter of the seller who passed away. And so we were listing an estate, basically. Okay. So I drove 45 minutes over to Garland, sat there for an hour. And I told Lords, I said, after we went over all the documentation, I was like, if you want, we can go over the house right now. Y'all get a spare key. We'll get it locked and loaded. And like, oh, like right now? And I was like, I'm good if y'all are good. And so I went over with Lords, and I've got a photo on my social media of her with her sign. I gave her one of my metal frames, and she had an insert. And I'm side by side with her. And when they walked in, I said, introduce me as your teammate. And I said, but together, collectively, we have 30 years experience instead of you having your license a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that, and I kind of pride myself on, that when I started my company, I told somebody what I was going to do to be different. And they said, good luck. Like, you can never do that. And so to me, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I've got that DNA in me that if you tell me I can't do something, I'll take pictures and do it twice.
Yeah.
And I won't let you forget it.
Well, and I've seen you, it's incredible. And I've seen you like practice what you preach over and over again. I'm going to train every day. I don't know that I've ever seen a day that you don't train. I've been with you since day one at DHS, and I'm so thankful for that opportunity on the business side, but just to watch the way you operate and the commitment that you have to your agents is incredible. I mean, it's second to none. I haven't seen anything like it. And for a virtual brokerage like you to not even have a physical location you support better than the ones that spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on real estate. It's that part of it's not necessary. It's the commitment from your broker that you really need. So, and so I want to lead that into, probably the biggest question of the day, and is, you've alluded to this already, is the NAR lawsuit.
Right.
And explain to me what the NAR lawsuit is first before we go into the rest of it.
Yeah, sure. So, in Texas, since they started, keeping track of rates in the early 70s, in Texas, always up until 96, an agent always represented the seller. There was no buyer agency at all. In 96, because of a lot of lawsuits, the legislature, through a Senate bill called Senate Bill 489, passed the buyer rep agreement into law. And so basically the concept was from 96 until really this month, you did not have a client if you didn't have a buyer rep signed. But you could work with a customer, show them plenty of homes without getting that form signed. Your risk was that they could go buy the home with somebody else that signed that form for them. Mm-hmm. Commissions in Texas have always been negotiable. I have agents that charge $300, $3,000, 1%, 2%. But apparently in a couple other states, the training wasn't as good as it is here in Texas. And so you had brokers and their agents going on listings telling sellers that commissions were fixed at 6%.
Oh, okay. And
so because of that, the United States Department of Justice got involved, and the NAR settlement now dictates that every state in the union, every state has to have a buyer rep agreement, number one, and it has to be signed before you show a home the first time. So previous to that, you could get a buyer rep signed or not, and you definitely didn't have to have it before you showed a home. But basically effective August 17th is when the actual settlement goes into full-blown law. On August 17th, you will absolutely have to have a buyer rep agreement to even show a home. Okay. So I think part of the problem that a lot of brokers will have with their agents is there's still brokers that don't even know how to explain a buyer rep in the first place. And that's after you've started a relationship with people. Now you're going to have to explain it to them before you ever have. You're basically going to be asking somebody to marry you on your first Tinder date. Mm-hmm. And I'm not on Tinder, but I can tell you that a lot of my kids are, and they're swiping left and right. And, the last thing they'd want to do is meet somebody tonight at Starbucks and have to get married to them. And so what I'm trying to explain to my agents is that there are some negotiable terms in this document. Number one, there's two forms that have come out. One's called a buyer rep short form, and one's called a buyer rep long form. Okay. The long form is very similar to what we've had. It's 5 pages. It's got a lot of fidelity duties in it that are specifically outlined in thick paragraphs. And then there's a single page. And that's what I'm recommending my agents use when they initially talk with a buyer about getting the document signed. One paragraph has a begin date and an end date. It says it ends at 11:59. I'm telling my agents that they can put the same day. And if they want with a pen, they can mark at 11:59 and they can put at 8 p.m. tonight. You know,
So what happens though? Say they sign that agreement and it expires at 8 p.m. and then the next day that client makes an offer on that house with a different agent. Is that they have no claim to that, or because they showed them
That's
that
correct.
house?
Yeah. So my belief is that if they met the buyer tonight at 6 p.m. and had a buyer rep that said, hey, in order for you to even go in this house, this is dated today and it ends tomorrow at 10 p.m. That's fine. A buyer might go, I don't want it to last tomorrow. I want it to be done when I'm done showing this house, because I might not like you and want to go with this other agent. Or I might want to go look at another house and I don't necessarily want you to be with me. So I'm using the short form as kind of like you're dating. So my agents, as soon as they meet that buyer, they're going to have an IBS, which is called an Information About Brokerage Services, and they're going to have a short form. And again, this is not a requirement. They can have a long form if they want. I just think the short form would be more easy to relay. And basically they'll say, look, I'm sure you've heard in the news, the Department of Justice of the United States of America has said that in order to look at this home, any agent in the United States has to have a form signed in order to walk in this home. Mm-hmm. If you end up liking me, then we can extend this for 6 months, 6 days, 6 hours. But as of right now, I'm letting you know that I want to prove myself to you. And so I want to tell you about resale on this home. The backyard faces due west, northwest, or southwest. It's going to be brutal in the summer. That you got to water your foundation because we have clay and caliche, and our house moves. It's about 24 inches thick. The slab just sitting on soil that's porous and it moves. And I'm going to tell you how to maintain your investment and talk about resale. And if you end up liking me, then we can extend this. The reason that I think that's important is because I think right now, based on everything going on in America, that human beings are very divisive and they're skeptical. And any document that says anything that lasts more than a day or even after the showing, that somebody could read it into, why wouldn't you just have it in when the showing's over? And then if I want to use you, I will call you tomorrow. I won't call another agent because I feel like what I'm getting from you today is far exceeds what I would ever get from anybody else. And so
where does that leave them though? I mean, in this case, they say they do that. What if they do like you, but then it expires and tomorrow they're like, man, I want to make an offer on this house, but I'm just going to call the listing agent instead and cut this guy out of the deal. I think that's a lot of the apprehension from the buyer's agents is like, why would I do that? Can you tie it to the house specifically? Could you say it lasts for 6 months on 123 Oak
Absolutely.
Street?
Yeah. So the single page and the long form have a market area. You could put 123 Easy Street. You could put today's date to tonight at midnight. You can put today's date for 6 months. And I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, I had a family that I met. I buy Zillow leads. So I had a Zillow lead come in. I met them on the phone, not in person yet. They wanted to look at a home. It was right around July 4th. I went over to Irving, showed them a house that backed up to George Bush and the backyard faced west. Never met him in my life. From India. First time ever been in the summer in Texas, in America. And in Texas, it's going to be hot. So I explained to them about the backyard. They had a couple little kids. I was talking to them about sports and soccer. And I thought I bonded really well with them. They ended up saying they wanted to now move their search to Wiley. And so I did a search in Wiley and I met them, I think the next day on a new build. And when I met them, I had the short form, got it signed, said that I would be representing them. We walked in and they loved this home. And the next day they texted me that they wanted, and I asked the builder what my buyer compensation was, buyer agent compensation. And they said it was 3%. The builder did. The next day, the buyer texted me and said, I want 2% of your 3%. And I said, absolutely not. And it was July 4th. I mean,
yeah.
And I said, number one, it's disrespectful that you didn't even say please. And I said that on the text. And I said, number two, you called me on a friggin' holiday when yesterday I took time away from my family to meet you. And I was like, feel like we had a great rapport. And I said, it will absolutely not happen. And he replied back, he goes, well, I'll just use another agent. I go, not on this home, you won't. And I said, on this home, I'm protected. And on that scenario, because I got signed in with the builder, which is imperative, I'm protected on that home for life, no matter if the buyer rep expired or not. Because builders have a policy where if you get signed in on the first interaction with them, that they won't switch realtors out, specifically for a commission deal.
Yeah.
Because they lose all their business. 90%.
It may be on the hook for both of them in the end, right? Like they'd have to write 2 checks instead of 1.
Yeah. So. But I mean, we're doing our training has been every day on these forms, on the listing side and on the buyer side. And one thing that a lot of agents do is they get a lot of bonuses when they work with builders. That's something that now also has to be disclosed. So everything has to be disclosed. So if hypothetically you were working with somebody on $1 million house and they were getting 3%, that's $30,000. If they were getting a $20,000 bonus, that's $50,000. That all has to be disclosed. You can't disclose just the 3 and separately get a credit card with a $20,000 bonus on it, which is what some builders did in the past. All that has to be disclosed now, or it's in violation of the Department of Justice lawsuit.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting too, because I've heard, some of the builders doing that these days. When you talk big numbers like that, I mean, like you said, the average home's 400, 500,000, but say on $1 million home, part of the, the rhetoric around this lawsuit is, well, you didn't earn $30,000. You didn't do $30,000 worth of work. What's your response to that comment?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. And what I try to do is I start from the beginning. So my agent, in order to even get that commission, there's got to be a listing. So at some point, a seller's got to call one of my agents. My agents are going to go out. They're going to meet them at the door, talk to them in the foyer, check out the house, go in the kitchen, and start going over the documents. When they get to the listing agreement, at some point in the listing agreement, it's going to say what my agent's charging to list the home and what they're offering, if anything, to an agent bringing the buyer. Now, it can be 0 because all commissions are negotiable. But generally speaking, since historically 35 years ago, it's been something around a total of 4, 5, or 6%. Hypothetically, it could be 0. So if the seller goes, well, I've heard about this lawsuit. Do I even have to pay a buyer's agent anymore? My agent's responses go, absolutely not. You're going to pay me this because I'm charging you this as a agent representing you as a seller, and I'm going to have a fidelity to exclude my self-interest and put your interest above mine. So whatever that commission is, that's with the seller. The other amount, absolutely. Now, if the seller asks my agent, who is a seller agent, what would you suggest? My agent, they can say what they want, but what I'd recommend is they say something like, well, I mean, if it were me, I'd offer something to a buyer's agent simply because a lot of buyers don't have the fee to pay their agent. And the last thing I want is for 5 houses on your street to be offering 1, 2, or 3% or a flat fee and you offering nothing. They shouldn't, but they could boycott your home and not show it.
Well, I mean, I had a conversation yesterday with an agent and, they actually helped this seller buy his house a couple of years ago, when both agents, made the 3%, which was customary, but not required. But now when he listed it, he was adamant that he was only going to pay the buyer's agent 1%. And they talked to him about it. And they talked to him about well, it's likely that your home won't get shown as much because, you're challenging that listing agent, even though it's on MLS, Zillow, whatever it's listed on, and all these people see it. All these clients are represented by an agent. Most of them are. And they're not going to come see this house if they're not paying any commission or if they're paying 1%. You could think your house is the best house in the neighborhood. It could be the best house in the neighborhood, and it could sell without it, but it's probably not going to sell for the same price because you're not bringing a whole pool of buyers into it. There's 60,000 licensed real estate agents in Dallas, and if you have one agent selling it versus 60,000 agents, you're going to lower the bar on that. And you're just cutting off your nose in spite of your face by saying, I'm not going to do this, because it's really the buyer that's paying this fee. It's not the seller paying it.
Right.
Because if the buyer didn't have that commission in there, the home would be less. Right.
Yep.
It's not for the seller to get more money, even though that's what they're thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, if I only pay the buyer's agent 1%, then I get 2% more. Well, no, it's the buyer's financing 2% more because your price is higher. So if I'm a buyer, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go in and offer 2% less because I got to pay that 2% to my buyer's agent and cover that cost one way or another. And that seller shouldn't have the benefit of that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, right now I showed a home on Saturday that was 900,000. And in the MLS, there was no mention of buyer agent commission at all, because it's now optional when you input a listing, if you even put it in there. It'll go out completely on July 29th. So I simply texted the agent, just like I text a builder. I was like, hey, I'm showing your home tomorrow at 123 Easy Street. What's your buyer compensation for an agent? And she replied back 3%. I said, okay. So yeah, I mean, there's always been the argument, who pays, what I think a lot of buyers are going to inadvertently do, that's going to really, I think, put them under a spotlight, is they're going to start trying to reach out to a listing agent thinking that they're getting representation, and the sign in the yard is a written contract between the seller and that agent to get them the highest price terms and conditions. They're the ones with the rapport with the seller. This is a buyer that won't get represented, and if they do, it'll be limited because it'll be an intermediary where they can't give advice and opinion. If they're the only agent, they can't give advice and opinion in that same brokerage firm.
Right.
And ultimately, what I think your question originally was, what does an agent do to justify the fee that they get? And unfortunately, there's some agents, and I remember when I got licensed, there was no internet. You had forms in your back of your trunk, and the agents that weren't the best would just pull out a form in the back of the trunk and write the offer up at the house, not knowing if the seller had a dream from God that told them what to list it at, or if it was actually based on some empirical data of the last 6 months of homes that sold. Yeah. So every agent at DHS, when they work with a buyer, they're going to pull the tax roll, find out what the taxes are. They're going to reach out to you to get them pre-approved, and you're going to know what the taxes are, because we'll tell you, or you'll find it through your records, give them an accurate portrayal of what their mortgage payment would be. And then we're going to go and do a CMA, a market analysis, and pull up the last 6 months. It'll give us a high, low, median, average price per square foot. Take it times the square footage of the subject home. It'll give us a range, high, low, median, average of what we could go in at. And what I tell my agents all the time is, hey, they'll text me like, hey, what would you go in at? Well, I'm not going to ever know what a buyer should go in at. No. I always tell my agents, if you look at them, I especially did this during COVID when the market was crazy, what's the highest price you're willing to go if I found out tomorrow that you didn't get the home for $1? If you weren't willing to go $1 over, then that should be your top price.
Right.
And the same with the seller. Hey, should I lower it? If you want to get it sold, I lower it to as low as you would lower it, or you wouldn't lower it another $1. And now we know we're at the lowest price and we're at the highest price, and we either got to match or we don't.
Yeah.
But the days of going back and forth little games and 10,000 here means they're going to come back at 5,000. Every home is specific with its own,
Well, yeah, it's about showing their worth, right? Like that's what you're saying is, and you see it on the listing agent side, is that agent progresses in their career, they become listing agents typically because it's a repeatable business.
Yeah,
plan,
referral
right?
business for sure.
Yeah, it's inside the box. You do X, Y, and Z. You make your presentation. You put it in the MLS. You do open houses. There's like a process to
Absolutely.
it. I don't know that many buyers agents, some do, but most don't really have a process. They're kind of wishing and hoping for a lead, and they get a lead, and they go show them a house, and then things just kind of go from there. And in my opinion, this should make the buyer's agent more of a professional salesperson. They need to have a buyer's presentation. They need to sit down with the buyer and show them what their worth is and why, and what could happen if they don't have them, because buyers don't know, especially first-time home buyers don't know, but buyers don't know if they're being represented properly. Like you said, the comps are correct. They don't know how to even turn in earnest money at the title company. They don't know what title company to pick. They don't know what home inspector to call to get it done inside the option period. And they don't know how to negotiate repairs inside. And so I've talked to some listing agents, or agents that call themselves listing agents, but they also help buyers, is they're licking their chops over this because they're like, put me in a room with a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing, and I'm going to win every single time.
Absolutely.
But I can see the buyers getting short-sighted with this, saying I can do it myself, or I just, I don't want to pay, or I can't pay that fee, and I have to do it myself. And then they're going to get taken to the cleaners in that situation. I just feel like everybody needs to speak the same language. The listing agents, the buyer's agents, not where it's a collusion kind of scenario, but this is the benefit of doing this, and this is why.
Absolutely.
Are there going to be instances outside of this? Sure. But collectively, everybody needs to talk about this, having both sides of representation and where this money comes from. There's a reason why it was set up this way. And I don't know why it needs to change. It's just the conversation around it has to change. It has to be more at the forefront. People need to talk about it more. And the greedy folks need to take a step back and realize that trying to win over 1 or 2% in the sale price of a $500,000 home in the grand scheme of things isn't worth it.
No, for sure. And what I absolutely 100% agree, buyer agents have to be able to show their worth. And there's an acronym called OLDCAR that goes on both sides when you have representation: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable care. And over the past month, I've been preaching that. You better know OLDCAR, and you better go, obedience, I'm going to lawful instruction of the client. If they want you to door knock to find a home for sale, then you do it. You don't follow anything unlawful, but lawful instruction, loyalty, and OLDCAR is going to be disclosure. You disclose known facts, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care. Reasonable care goes into that market analysis. I mean, I remember going on a listing once where a guy told me that he had a dream and God told him what to list the home for.
Wow.
Now,
it's quite a dream.
I told him that God would be the only one that could buy it because anybody else would need an appraisal, and probably Jesus would be the only one that wouldn't need an appraisal on that home. Yeah. And he laughed, and I was like, I ain't joking, because nobody's going to buy that home. Now, if a buyer agent showed that home and didn't do a market analysis, they could have gone in $10,000 less than what I had it listed at, and they would have still overpaid by $50,000.
Wow.
Because the seller decided what they wanted to list it at, not on any data. Yeah. So that's what a buyer needs to realize, is that there's not going to be this skipping all steps A through Z to just make an offer on a home. There's going to be some due diligence. And, there's a lot of agents that want to take the shortcut. I mean, that's what's going on right now in our nation. People want results quick without seeing any kind of work ethic to get there. Yeah. And I've got agents in my own office. They'd rather be activists than realtors. They'd rather put on a dress or something from H&M and be known as an influencer, or a guy wants to be a GQ model, and it has nothing that ties into real estate, but on there it'll say they're an influencer and a realtor. And I've always told my agents that that's not going to be a winner. I had to let an agent go 2 months ago because they'd rather be an activist for the Palestinian-Israel war than talk about resale for a buyer. And, it kind of does go into the fact that you've got to know about the worldly events. I watch the news every morning. I have websites I go to, and I like to be super informed. I know every debate that's happened since 1984, and I know quotes that have happened in debates. I know small trivia. And the reason is because when I meet somebody that might not possibly agree with what I agree with, I still can relate to them because I generally know more about the person they voted for, even if I didn't vote for them, than they do. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the best compliment I can ever have is when I let somebody off after showing them 5 or 6 homes, and they think that I'm going to vote for somebody that they're voting for when I'm not. But I just showed basic respect. I mean, right now, it's so crazy, the events that happen. My wife's out of town this last weekend, and it's funny, every time she's gone out of town, some big events happen in our life. Last year, she went out of town, and our home was struck by lightning, and I put it out in my T-shirt in the attic. There was insulation on fire in the attic, and I took my shirt off and put it out. This year, Trump was shot. I had gone on a recruiting appointment at Starbucks. I came home watching TV. Could have been watching World Cup or whatever soccer was on, but instead I was watching the news. And he got shot. I mean, it was crazy. But almost immediately, and I knew it because of the divisiveness in our country, that you start hearing all this conspiracy. And at the end of the day, I tell my agents that you have to watch MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. You've got to be able to get a perspective of what everybody believes. Because if you believe that only your belief system is what's represented in Collin County, you're going to see the melting pot that we have in our country. You're going to turn off a lot of buyers and sellers and tenants and landlords.
Yeah, you can have your opinion, but it doesn't need to be expressed on social media.
Absolutely.
You can have it, you can be supportive of it, but you don't need to be divisive about it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, what people, I always tell my agents, when I was in college, I worked for Ann Richards. She was probably the most liberal governor Texas ever had. I graduated from college, and 2 years later, I worked for Pat Buchanan, who makes Barry Goldwater look like a liberal. And Barry Goldwater was the most conservative person. So I've been I've worked for both sides. At the end of the day, and no one's going to be your savior. And I just think that people get hooked on this, the second coming of Jesus every time 4 years runs around, that people are going to save you. And I'm an independent thinker. I'm an independent broker. I pride myself on that. I can see both sides, but there's just no discourse anymore. And so if you can't have a mature conversation without bringing this radical crap from both sides, then you basically, have to learn how to hold the middle. Because at the end of the day, the middle is what's going to make every election from here until I'm dead.
Yeah.
And it's going to be people that just have some common sense. There's two sides that are really dug in, and politics by definition is the art of persuasion. And I just what I've seen over the past 4 days is enough to just so sickening. And thank God for sports, because it's one of the things that gives people reprieve.
I know. Can't wait till football season,
Yeah,
right? Like, I mean, it's the doldrums of baseball,
Oh, it is.
and like that's about all we got. And a little bit of soccer,
Yep.
and
Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, Caitlin Clark, right? So, what do you think is the market? Like, where's the market right now, and where do you think for the rest of this year? What does it look like, as from an agent's perspective, from a buyer's perspective? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those questions I get from agents all the time. I mean, I watch Fox Business on mute every day. Try to keep up with the rates, what Powell will be doing, what he won't be doing. It changes almost, as much as the time of day. I see, possibly determining in the next, 30 days, whether there'll be rates in September that are affected. I made money when Bill Clinton was president, and I've made money when, Donald Trump was president. So, I mean, somebody real conservative, somebody pretty liberal. Bill Clinton at the time, he ran 2 terms. I voted for him the first time. I didn't the second time when he lied to me. I remember being in the elevator, and I mean, a blind person could pick stocks in 1993, whenever he was president, and make money, because the economy was balanced with a conservative Congress and a Democratic, executive. I don't really see any politician, any outcome in November affecting real estate. I mean,
Really?
In my opinion,
Okay.
Because in my opinion, it comes down to, I made money when, over the past 35 years, I've made money no matter what the economy was. I remember when there was a shortage of homes, we went to doing leases a lot. When there was foreclosures, we did a lot of leases. The short sale. I mean, I sold 50 homes the year of the short sale, 2007. 37 from one investor that bought a whole subdivision up in Frisco by answering my phone, by not letting it go to voicemail. I showed a guy 10 homes one day, and he ended up buying 37 homes off of Ohio and Lebanon in Frisco. So I think it comes down to the work ethic of the individual.
But what about from a buyer's perspective? Like,
from a buyer's perspective,
if you were a buyer looking to buy a house, or a seller looking to sell a house, like, what's your advice to them at this point?
Well, for a buyer, I mean, I'm an advocate of you, Brooks, and you've always said date the rate and marry the home. And like my daughter right now, she's a apartment up in just north of the Star at the Bexley, and her rent continues to go up every year by a couple $100. Of course, she's not making any payment towards equity, and she's not her own investor by having her own property. So I've always believed real estate is the best investment when you talk about just the basic appreciation in a dull market, making extra principal payments, building your net worth. For me, always a buyer should buy instead of renting, no matter what the rate is, because you can get in it, and obviously as rates go down, price will go up, and rates go up, price will go down. So I always kind of look to you as well as somebody that can predict what's going to happen in your knowledge of the market more than
my crystal ball. Yeah.
Look
at my crystal ball.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that if you're a buyer, you get pre-approved and you lock and load. If you're a seller, if you're looking to move right now, there's a shortage of homes. So it just depends on the characteristics of the home. If the backyard faces George Bush and the backyard faces west, and it's a second story master, and it's a sloped yard, that's going to have a problem resale no matter what market you're in. And a buyer agent that tells them that that's a good buy is going to be doing them a disservice.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we saw a lot of bad buys during COVID, right? People
Yeah.
were wanting to buy anything.
no matter what.
Power
Yeah.
lines overhead or busy street, be damned. They
Oh,
were going to buy it,
absolutely.
and pay too much for it.
Pay too much for it.
Yeah. And in those markets, people just got to have something. And
Yeah.
that's crazy. But, we've seen, we're in the lowest market as far as mortgage volume goes since like 1996.
Okay.
I think $1.3 trillion worth of home loans, the lowest in 28 years. But there's still $1.3 trillion worth of mortgages being done. There's a lot of cash buyers in the market. We really, in our area, Dallas-Fort Worth, we haven't seen prices come down. In fact, I want to say they're up 3 or 4%
That's
on the year or something like that. So it's always the right investment. And I caution people, as you know, always, you can't wait for the right time or the right rate or the right president or the right anything. You just got to do what you got to do. Like life in general puts you where you got to be. If you need a bigger house because you had 3 kids and you live in 1,000 square feet, you got to sell your house and move up.
Yeah, for sure.
So I believe in the same way you do. Everything will still move along, even in the worst of times. Like you said, short sale era of 2008 was crazy, but there was still tons of business going on. There were still people buying houses. Yes, the values went down, but in DFW, not nearly what they did in the rest of the country. But that was a one time in history kind of thing. Like there's only been one other time, I think, where values went down 2 years in a row, like since the Great Depression. And so people have to understand that housing is still in a shortage kind of scenario where you can't just pick and choose to say, well, I'm going to wait till it goes down, because all those people from 2019 sure wish they would have bought,
Oh, yeah.
And even all the people coming out of 2022 when prices were going crazy still wish they would have bought, because they've gone up. They went up 8% last year, 4% this year. Like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, I'm a big investor, and Warren Buffett is famous for saying, buy stocks that you visit daily. So, Amazon, we use it every day. Seems like I go to Starbucks all the time. My wife loves McDonald's. And I mean, there's these Magnificent Seven, the significant.
Your wife does not eat McDonald's.
She does.
Wow.
Every day. So, but I mean, it's the same concept that you buy stocks because of their leadership and, the Magnificent Seven. I think you buy a home because it's a great investment, and if the rate's high, then you can always refinance.
Right.
But you could wait for rates to go low and only have homes that back up to the west in a busy road, or you could buy a home that looks good now that you like, maybe have a little higher payment, and when rates adjust, you can refinance, but you didn't lose out on the house because you're waiting on the sideline. I mean, history is shown that people that wait on the sidelines, they miss golden opportunities. Yeah. And my wife's very indecisive and I'm very decisive, and it's a good mix. Just in the last 4 months, we went out to Princeton and saw a house we wanted to buy as an investment property. And we went with the lenders, with the builder, only because the amount of money they were giving was obscene.
Yeah.
But my wife was like, well, let's wait a week. I'm like, well, it won't be available in a week.
Yeah. And it's not going to get cheaper.
It's not going to get cheaper. So, but you've got to be decisive in life or you're going to miss opportunities.
For sure.
And I just think that what separates sometimes the doers from the dreamers is that, you got to be decisive. You ask. I mean, I'm a big follower of Steve Jobs. Before he died, he did a lot of sit-down podcasts, and one that I've given my agents, I mean, they've heard it from me so many times. When Steve Jobs was 14 years old, this is when the Yellow Pages were in, he called John Hewitt of Hewitt Packard, from the Yellow Pages, and John Hewitt picked the phone up. And Steve Jobs was like, hey, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 14. I'm building a little semiconductor and want to know if y'all have any spare parts. I mean, they thought the kid was crazy. Mm-hmm. And they invited him to come up, and they were so enthralled by his personality, they offered him a job that summer putting together something at Hewitt Packard. Uh-huh. And the rest is history, of what it made him. Yeah. But on his deathbed, he was like, it's the number one difference I see in people is that if you don't ask, there's no opportunity for a yes. There's always a no if you don't ask. And that's one of the guiding principles in our firm is that you ask, and you'll be surprised that I say yes. Hey, Doug, will you go on a listing with me? Yes. If you never asked, then don't tell me after the event that I didn't go with you on a listing because you never asked me.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that previous brokers I've been with would never do and told me I could never do, is go on listings with agents. And you know what? When you adjust your hours from 5 a.m. to midnight, it's amazing how much time you can allow for a lot of things and not feel stressed that the day's ending at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
We have a lot of older brokers in the DFW area. I mean, my God, Debbie Holiday, bless her heart, she's passed away, but her license started with a 02 or 012. And, I'll look at license numbers now that are start with an 85, about to be 90, but mine starts with 043, which is a early 90s license number. But you start seeing these brokers, and Trek is just now adopting a forum about broker succession that should be coming out in the next 2 months. Mm-hmm. Because 2 years ago, a prominent broker had a heart attack and didn't have a succession plan, and the whole brokerage went down.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the things I really pride myself on, I try to stay in shape. I try to be evolving with real estate. I started my company based on the fact that I leave video messages, and the broker I used to be with didn't believe in them. And that video message has evolved into a real talk that I do on Fridays, as you know, at 9:30. And this I'm incredibly impressed with, your studio here. And I just think that you always got to be thinking about what's evolving. And the only thing that's constant is change. And you're either going to be part of it or you're going to be left in the past. 100%. And just there's so many brokers that will be left in the past with these new changes, in my opinion.
For sure. Yeah. The education you put around it and being at the forefront, I have really not even seen anybody really training around it. I think a couple of days ago, I saw a few brokerages doing some things, and, the benefit of social media these days, you can kind of keep tabs on a lot of other deals, but it's not really being talked about. It's not being talked about enough by lenders, because that's part of the conversation that we have to have with a buyer now is
absolutely,
this is how this works. Because in before is, well, it's taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. Well, now, if you sign an agreement at 3%, do you have the additional 1 or 2 or 3% to pay? And if not, then you can't go look at that house.
Right.
If the seller's going to pay 1 and you said you're going to pay 3, you don't have 2 more percent, and you can't go buy that home. And so while that sounds kind of scary to some people, it's just the reality. That's just how things have to work. And we have to be partnering with our clients and with our agents in order to make sure that you guys are all in the know as that process is going along. There's nothing worse than getting surprised with hey, you another $6,000 at closing.
No, absolutely. And the neat thing about this new form, specifically the short form, is that there's a place for a market area. You can put the address of the house. There's a place for the commission, which hypothetically, as crazy as this sounds, you're gonna always reach out to the listing agent before you show the property. And it's just 100%. You got to text the agent. Hey, I'm Doug Smith with DHS Realty. I'm going to show 123 Easy Street. What is your buyer agent compensation? Oh, it's 1%. Okay. Well, my agents will have an opportunity to put 1% in the buyer rep if that's what they're going to charge, because I know a lot of agents in DFW that would do it for 1%. Mm-hmm. And if my agents put 3, and now the buyer, basic math goes, well, what's the other 2 coming from? And it's a $600,000 house. They're like, you need me to come up with 12 grand? They're not going to work with them. So I think there's also going to have to be a lot of common sense used. And what's funny is that the old style brokers that are in the area are so adamant about these percentages, and they've always been negotiable. It's got to be a mind shift to you're dating now. Whereas before, it's almost like you were married when you met a buyer because you knew your commission was dictated in the MLS. That was like a marriage. Like you're like, hey, you know what? Whether you like me or not, I know I'm getting this. So I can even put 0. You could put buyer in the old buyer rep. You could put 0% commission.
Really?
Well, because the buyer wasn't paying you. It was in the MLS.
Oh, okay.
And everything in the MLS was already dictated. Now that's not in the MLS anymore. Mm. And the difference is now you have to reach out to the agent and ask them what they're going to pay before you show it. Now, you could obviously not do that. That means that an agent that's not getting trained could put hypothetically in a short buyer rep form, 0% commission, go show a home and find out that they're not even getting paid on the deal because the seller agent never reached back out to the buyer agent and said, oh yeah, we're offering this or that.
So I know it can't be an MLS, but So every listing agent's phone's just going to ring off the hook.
Yeah.
They can't put it out there anywhere.
They can put it on their. They can put it on their social. It cannot be on the MLS at all. It can't be in private remarks. It can't be in transaction desk. It can't be in the remarks section. So there will be no mention of commission. Period. So the easiest thing is going to be what we've been doing with builders. Is that you just got to reach out to the builder, which is what I did. I reached out to an agent. Literally, I told you 3 days ago. Just a simple text. Hey, I'm showing 123 Easy Street tomorrow. What's your buyer compensation for the agent? 3%. Okay, thanks. And there was no other conversation. I made the appointment, went and showed it. Nothing panned out, but if so, the buyer wouldn't have paid me anything if my fee was 3%. All commissions are negotiable. You could put it on your Facebook. You could post it all over social media.
So there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing at all.
There's nothing legal against that. It's
nope.
Just it can't go.
Can't be in the MLS. That's it.
So they could point you to their own private website,
exactly.
Their Facebook page. Okay.
Now you think about my brokerage firm with 350 agents versus EXP and some of these Keller Williams that have thousands of agents. I mean, you could hypothetically post the form on the MLS, but that would be very cumbersome for an agent to go to a site, have to look through and shift through and find the actual address and open up a form and see, so most likely, in my opinion, what it's going to boil down to is you're going to do exactly what you've done with builders since the beginning of time. It's a simple text. Yeah. Hey, Susie with Ebby Holiday, Susie with Keller Williams. I'm showing your 123 Easy Street tomorrow. What is your buyer agent compensation?
Gotcha. Right.
What's your BAC?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they reply back.
Makes sense. Right on. Well, I think we could go on for hours and hours. Obviously, there's a lot of big topics that we could be talking about today, but that's the biggest one that we've been really not focused enough on, but the one is the topic du jour for the next month or two.
Absolutely.
I think it's all going to settle out. 6 months from now, it'll be old hat and we'll be doing things just as we are, like not as we were, but as we are then. So thank you for all the explanation, all the great answers, spending time with me today here.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I really praise you for the education and knowledge you're passing on to everybody. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Spend a lot of time, bringing that stuff to the forefront and enjoy doing it. And so I'm sure we'll have you back again here soon.
Love it.
But thank you for coming to our first ever podcast.
Thank you, Brooks.